Let's look now at species that adapt to the environment. Now, when an environment or an ecosystem has a change in either its biotic or abiotic conditions, that's the living or non-living conditions, the population there or a population there really only has three choices. They can either adapt to those necessary changes, they can leave the area, pack their bags and go somewhere else, or they die out. And really those are the three potential options available to these changing ecosystems. Adapt, leave, or die. Let's talk about adaptation. And an adaptation is a genetic trait that improves an organism's chance of surviving and reproducing. And the important piece there is genetic. It's not like we adapt by putting a jacket on or something like that. It's an adaptation, a genetic improvement that increases the chances of surviving and reproducing. Through adaptation, there's also a concept called natural selection. You've probably heard of natural selection. And what natural selection is the process that favors organisms that are better adapted to the environment, while eliminating those that are poorly adapted. So any organism, any species, any population that has adapted to its ecosystem has a greater chance of survival. That's what natural selection is all about, favoring those that have adapted to the environment while eliminating those that are poorly adapted. Now, predation is actually a really strong force in natural selection. Really, if the prey have not adapted, the predators will eventually just eat them all. Predation really is the key to natural selection. If you cannot adapt and adjust to the environment, you're likely going to get eaten by a predator. Predators have some characteristics that actually improve their chances, that they have adapted to. And most predators have advantages like being faster or stronger. Or maybe they're not fast and strong, but they can hide well. They can be camouflaged. Now at the same time, prey will also have to adapt, and they may have things like camouflage themselves where they can hide from a predator, or they may have some type of defenses, like a chemical defense, such as a skunk or a snake. Defenses that prevent predators from eating them, from attacking them. If we study two species, they may actually do this process called coevolution. And coevolution is really the concept where one species adapts and the other adapts in response to that first species adaptation. So it's a series of adaptations over thousands and thousands, if not millions of years, of one species adapting in response to the other. And an example of this would be herbivores that actually have specialized beaks. So specialized beaks that allow them to digest the plants that have sharp thorns. So the plants have developed a defense of being sharp thorns and spikes, and the herbivores have adapted to that sharp thorns and spikes by having these specialized teeth. And if we look at the picture here, we'll see that these are different types of birds that have beaks that are adapted to that environment. Whether it's a elongated beak that allows them to break through these sharp thorns, or whether it's a beak more like a parrot where it can break through fruit or seeds or nuts. These specialized teeth and beaks. The sharp thorns and spikes prevent being attacked by a predator, whereas the predator adapts to have these strong beaks or teeth. Coevolution. Sometimes there's actually species that resemble another. Resemble something that's poisonous or dangerous or distasteful, and this is called mimicry. So some species actually have adapted or have a physical adaptation that make them look poisonous, dangerous, or distasteful. An example of this, and there's many examples of this, is there's many types of frogs that are very poisonous and other frogs that look the same that are not. There's also many types of snakes, same idea, that are actually not dangerous, but they resemble something poisonous and dangerous. And this is called mimicry. All of these different characteristics allow both predators and prey to survive in an ecosystem. Well, let's look now at another concept called biodiversity. And what biodiversity is it's a variety of organisms and the variation within a given ecosystem or biome. So what variety exists in that ecosystem? Not only how many, but what different types of organisms exist in that ecosystem. This biodiversity varies by location, and it really depends on the abiotic factors, the non-living factors, temperature, precipitation. These factors really determine the biodiversity of an ecosystem. When we measure biodiversity, we actually measure it in primary productivity, and it's the measure of available energy from producers, the amount of energy that's actually available for the next level up, for the plant eaters. And that's what we call primary productivity. When we have an ecosystem that has lots of producers, like a rainforest, it means it has a high primary productivity, which supports biodiversity. And that is why our rainforests have the most variety of organisms, including plants and animals. A large level of primary productivity. Lots and lots of energy available from producers. If we go on the other side, if we look at an ecosystem such as a desert ecosystem or tundra, they have low biodiversity. There's not a lot of energy from producers. Now, these ecosystems are much more fragile. So plants in these ecosystems are very, very rare. So these ecosystems can be damaged very, very easily because they have a low primary productivity, a low number of producers, which means a low number of energy. As we look at ecosystems, sometimes we have species that actually are completely gone from the biosphere, from Earth. And this is what we call extinction. A species that is completely gone. And there's many, many examples of extinction. One you may come to mind are the dinosaurs, but there's many, many different types. Most mammals that once existed are now extinct. They no longer exist anywhere on Earth. Now, sometimes, though, a species isn't eliminated from Earth, but eliminated from a certain area. And that's called extirpation. And that means the species no longer exists in one area. It might still be somewhere else on Earth, but it doesn't exist in a certain area. A local extinction. Very, very different than an extinction where it doesn't exist on Earth. Extirpation is it doesn't exist in one area. Now, when we look at species, sometimes we have species that are the main species that control the ecosystem. The main players, which we call the keystone species. A species that controls the type and numbers of other species in that environment. And so these species are really the ones that control everything else in that ecosystem. If that species goes down, the rest of the ecosystem goes down. And we're going to discuss the example of sea otters in a kelp forest from your textbook, and we're going to look at other types of keystone species. And there's another main type of keystone species that can control the number of species in the environment, and that is you and I. Human beings are a keystone species. We have the ability to control the number of species in any environment.